In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Eternal God, I pray to you for all those you have given me, to love with a special love and with special concern. Let them be illumined by your light. Let all imperfection be taken from them, so that in truth they may work in your garden where you have assigned them to work. I commend to you those whom you have put on my shoulders. You commission me to keep them awake, me who am always sleeping. Wake them up yourself, kind and compassionate Father, so that the eyes of their understanding may always be wide awake in you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, everyone, welcome to Holy Week. This is the recording for April the 6th, 2020. Anno Domini. I need to shave. Kind of ran out of razors, and I'm trying to stay away from the store. You guys understand the meaning with everything going on, so I guess you guys can see over time the way this thing is going to be a monstrosity growing out of proportion. But what we need to talk about today is we need to continue talking about, yes, indeed, the sea wolf. Yes, and for Monday, I believe we are on chapter the 24th, chapter 24. This is a very interesting chapter, and there aren't a lot of terms that you need to know. But we'll get through some of the things that you should know, things you should remember from this chapter to get them out of the way. There's a term. So Wolf Larsen was an infamous poacher, right? And the term poacher, right? You'll notice that poach has a similar word pouch, right? And the origin of the word poacher, it has the same Latin root referring to a little bag. A poacher is someone who hunts illegally. Illegally, I don't know, sometimes I don't know how to spell these things, but someone who hunts illegally, I'll have to look up how to spell that correctly, but is that an A in illegal? Anyway, sorry guys, I'm a little out of it today. It comes from this term that's similar to the root of the word pouch, which means a little bag. It's like a thief. The origin is someone who would take something and then kind of put it in their bag on the sly. Poachers, though, as the term evolves, refers to those people who are particularly stealing animals and hunting animals that they're not supposed to. Today, the term poacher is usually used for those people who hunt rare animals or who hunt animals that are in danger, like people who are elephant poachers or tiger poachers. Poacher is a word that tends to be really, really vilified. In the case of Wolf Larsen as a poacher, he's not a poacher because of the kind of animals he's killing. Like off the coast of Japan, it's perfectly legal to shoot all sorts of things. You can even kill whales in Japanese waters. But they're getting awfully close to Russian waters, where they do not take kindly to people who are sealing there, that don't have the proper license and paperwork there. And the reference, they say, is they make this reference to this thing called the salt mines. And this reference to the salt mines, it's exactly what you think it is. A salt mine is literally a place where they mine, right, where they dig out of the earth. It is literally a place where they mine salt. But the Russian salt mines, which is oftentimes where they would send people who are convicted who are not from Russia, is actually a death sentence. A salt mine, like when people talk about back to the salt mine, it's often an expression for the most horrible place to work. And the reason for that is, if you didn't know this about salt is highly corrosive. I mean, you guys see what salt does, the salt on the roads that melt snow. You know what it does to the paint job on your cars and what it does over time to your cars and the rust and corrosion it causes on cars. If you're forced to work inside a salt mine, your life expectancy is very, very short, because the salt in the air it actually will corrode your lungs and you die from the corrosiveness in your lungs. So that's one thing that they absolutely do need to be afraid of in the chapter. So that's why historically salt mines were usually a place where they send prisoners, even back in Roman times. If you didn't know, back in Roman times, salt was actually used as a currency, and that's where we get this phrase, worth his salt. And that simply means worth his pay. That's not where we get the term salty from. That just means earthy That just means someone with a foul mouth. Okay. So we have this. You'll notice we have this word perturb and perturbation, right? We have this word, it's come back with this word imperturbable, right? That means someone who just can't be perturbed, right? Someone, just as someone who's impenetrable, right? Poker face. That would be someone who can't be penetrated, someone who can't be seen through, right? Imperturbable is someone who cannot be perturbed. And this is a reference to the hunter Smoke, who is one of the hunters, along with Henderson, who's mentioned occasionally in the text. And we have to get to the Smoke thing coming up. So we have another thing that we should remember is in this chapter, we once hear about Wolf Larsen's brother, Death Larsen, right? And we learn about the name of his ship. And the name of his ship is the Macedonia, right? And the significance, if you don't know Macedonia, Macedonia was a nation that was to the north of Greece. If you didn't know where Alexander the Great, the person who conquered most of the known world in his time, he was actually from Macedonia. He then went south, conquered Greece, and then conquered the Persian Empire. So the idea of this name, the Macedonia, and one of the things to understand is this is a steamship. That means it's powered by a steam engine. It's not powered by sails like the Ghost is. That's, remember, Wolf Larsen's ship, the ship that we're on. The Ghost is an old-time sailing schooner converted. It was actually a racing schooner, very, very fast ship, at least for a ship powered by the wind, that's been outfitted as a stealing ship. The Macedonia, which is going to be bigger, stronger, faster, it relies on an engine. It doesn't need the wind. And while it costs a lot more to run the Macedonia, it can also go faster, and it's also a symbol of the Industrial Revolution. It's a symbol of greater power, right? So we know Death Larsen's ship is named the Macedonia, and don't forget the name of Wolf Larsen's brother Death, because it is going to be a pretty big incident in this chapter. So let's get into those are some of the terms that have been thrown out. One of the main quotes that's thrown is something that is Maud Brewster quotes Shakespeare, and it's "Who or whoever steals my purse steals trash." And it's an argument about what's going on in the text. And there's basically a sealing feud going on between Wolf and his brother Death over a certain territory of seals and a certain place where they're fishing, so to speak. They're actually hunting. But when you say hunting on the water, it sounds weird. But they're basically kind of having a territorial dispute. And she quotes this passage from Shakespeare, which I will discuss in a minute. So first, let us talk about this thing going on with Smoke being imperturbable. One of the things you may remember is that one of the things Humphrey tells Maud very early is that they need to have a secret alliance, right? Wolf cannot know, right, that we're planning together, right? If he knows that, that's only going to spell trouble for us. So they try not to look at each other in public. They try not to talk too much to each other openly, etc., because they're trying to avoid Wolf Larsen's anger, right? And we may notice at the first meal that we saw when it was just Hump, Maud, the hunters, the engineers, and Wolf Larsen, we noticed that nobody was actively flirting with Maud Brewster, that nobody, in spite of the fact that they were a bunch of lonely men, they were not flirting with the only attractive woman around, even though they hadn't seen another woman for months. This begins to change with the hunter Smoke, and also I believe the hunter Henderson. This is, to use another word that we saw earlier, they talks about them being overly gallant to her. It's another term that you should remember, gallant, right? And when we say over gallant or gallant, that means they're overly gentlemanly to her, like, "Hello, fine lady, how are you doing today?" Right? That kind of thing. They wouldn't have dared do this before. But the reason why Henderson and Smoke begin to do this is because they're beginning to realize that Wolf is slowly, and it's largely because Humphrey has told Maud to be friendly with him and talk about literature with him and try to make him think that she likes him a bit. that he's beginning to restrain some of his savagery around her a bit. And once the sailors begin to realize that, they realize that he is not going to behave as savagely as he would normally. And in so doing, they're beginning to take advantage and they're beginning to do things to deliberately piss him off, but they can only do those things in Maud Brewster's presence because that's the only way they'll ever be able to do anything and get away with it. In this case, Smoke and Henderson, and because they're both hunters, right? Number one, they're less afraid of Wolf because they handle guns for a living, number one. And number two, because, if they can't be ordered like sailors. So, for example, right, he cannot order them the way he could order around any of the member of the sailing crew. A hunter is like an independent contractor aboard the ship. They work with Wolf Larsen. They don't work for Wolf Larsen. It's not like being in the military type situation where Wolf Larsen could just order them to do push-ups or something else. And so for that, Wolf Larsen doesn't have complete power over the hunters, right? We remember the hunters are at the captain's table. Now, that doesn't mean that Wolf can't still beat the living crap out of them if he decides to. But this is why Smoke, when he's being overly gallant, right? Remember that word gallant, to Maud Brewster, he only does it when Wolf Larsen is around in order to piss him off, to get his goat a little bit. But he's too smart to do it when she's not around or when he's not around, because if he were to hear about it or see it by proxy, then it's very likely that he would get his ass kicked, right? So what we begin to see is we see in this kind of the way in which Wolf Larsen is changing himself just a little bit for Maud Brewster. We see in this law of the jungle, we see in this kind of jungle ecosystem that they are on the Ghost, the other animals, the other jungle predators, are already beginning to see that little bit of weakness and try to take advantage of that little bit of weakness. One of the things that this kind of confirms in the story is, even though I said before that Wolf was not going to change for the beautiful woman, this was the anti-typical sea romance, is that one of the reasons why Wolf is not going to change is precisely because he sees that sentimentality, and he's going to talk about sentimentality in this chapter, that sentimentality, right, that romanticism, that emotional, lovey-dovey, making, decisions based upon positive or good feelings, those things only leave you more weak and more vulnerable to attack in Wolf Larsen's mind. And this example of Smoke being overly gallant and him restraining his violence when Maud Brewster around, this is already an indication to Wolf Larsen of how just that little bit of compromise is going to inspire this opinion that he is not as strong as he was before, right? And this already shows the dynamic of one of the reasons why Wolf can't even begin to give an inch. Because the moment he begins to give an inch, those people who begin to think that they might be able to leverage it, or in order to be able to take advantage of it, well, they're already starting to do so, right? But here's the key, right? At no point does Smoke think that he can actually flirt with Maud and get away with it. Humphrey knows, right, that when he says, Cookie needs your attention, just to send him away so he can have alone time with Maud Brewster, he sees that Cookie is actually still passed out. Cookie didn't ask for him. Wolf Larsen lied to make him go away. But Humphrey was smart enough in that command to realize when he found the unconscious cook that what Wolf was really saying is, go away, I want to spend time alone with the lady. And he knew not to show himself for some time in order not to get his anger up. But what we see, right, is this idea in the Sea Wolf, right, this idea of when we talk about this drama of sexual selection, right, that the attention of the woman is symbolic of both territory, right, and power. I mean, you've heard the phrase marking his territory, and you've seen the way boys often, teenage boys oftentimes, react around teenage girls. It's just this kind of primitive alpha male power struggle stuff. So the gallantry that Smoke and Henderson are actually showing towards Maud is merely a challenge of Wolf Larsen, and that kind of weakness is not something that he can tolerate and maintain control of the situation.